Welcome to this lesson where I'm talking all about hands-on adjustments and assists for new yoga teachers. So I want to share with you the basics in getting started and how you would even set up the stage to offering hands-on adjustments in your in-person yoga classes. Maybe it's in group yoga classes or it might be in one-on-one private lessons that you do. Either way, if you are interested in giving hands-on assists, keep watching. First of all, I have some notes for you. So go ahead and download them, print them, or save them so you can make your own notes in addition to these. And these notes actually come from the first part of this book. If you haven't seen this book, haven't heard about this book, I highly recommend it for those of you interested in, reading books on topics such as yoga adjustments. This is probably the most comprehensive book out there on the topic of yoga adjustments. It's called Yoga Adjustments by Mark Steffens. He also wrote Yoga Sequencing, and it's very textbook-like, so it's a great reference book. It's not something that you're going to read cover to cover, but there are 3 different parts in this book, and I'm going to talk about them real quick. The first part is the foundations, which is where a lot of my notes came from. So the foundations of what I'm going to cover today, and I'm going to add in some of my own little elements and tricks that I've learned over the years. That's in these notes. Section 2, part 2 is the biggest part. It's the application, so it goes pose by pose on giving different kinds of adjustments in each pose. Most of them you are not going to use, not as a new yoga teacher. There's probably 3 or 4 or 5 poses, maybe more, maybe less, and just a few adjustments that you're going to make to get started, and that's what we're talking about today. But this does have more of a guide for a lot of the poses and a lot of different adjustments in the application section. In the third section, it is the evolution. So it's a really short section just talking about sort of the future. But what I really like about this book in particular versus the yoga sequencing book that he also wrote is there is an appendix back here, Appendix A, that has each yoga pose in Sanskrit and English. So in the book itself, it mostly talks about, or it gives you Sanskrit names of each pose, but in the back Appendix A, it will share with you alphabetically from Sanskrit, and then it will share with you the English name and a picture of it. So there's a lot of really great resources too in the back, just like the appendices in the back are really helpful. Again, great resource book, I'd recommend it. You can also check it out at your local library, maybe, if they have it in stock. I say that because that's where I first read this book, I checked it out for free at my local library. I paged through it, got to know it a little bit, and then decided, yeah, I'm gonna buy this on Amazon. So I ordered it, and now it's on my shelf. So that is Yoga Adjustments by Mark Steffens. And the notes I have are just going through each of the principles, and it's really just a brief outline of the foundations portion of this book. And I wanted to add, of course, a little bit more too. So let's go through some of the things in this document that I've created just to give you my voice speaking. Some of you like to hear things and watch things more than you do like to read. So here we go, let's go through them. First, we've got the 7 principles of hands-on adjustments. 7 principles. Number 1 is to teach what you know. Don't try to teach things you're unfamiliar with. So this means you need to have a regular practice. You need to know what it feels like to have this adjustments being made. You need to know it in your body what it feels like. And there's some really great tips on how to know more so that you can teach more. Number 1 is to maintain a consistent practice. Number 2 is to practice under a variety of conditions. And I really like this one because sometimes we can get in this mode of, oh, I'm not gonna practice if I don't feel well, or if I'm stressed out, or if I'm too busy. Instead, fight that urge and practice anyway and see what comes up. So a variety of conditions, even when you're feeling a little bit sick or have a cold, because you will have students eventually, maybe not right now, who will come in who aren't feeling the best. I've even been told in the past by my teacher to go home because I wasn't feeling well, but I showed up anyway because I loved the class. So I've practiced under a variety of conditions, and I hope that you would do the same so that you get an understanding of conditions that will arrive in your classes when you're teaching. Number 3 is to learn all the basic elements of each pose, of each asana. So learning the benefits, the contraindications, the alignment, energetic actions. So things that you could learn, well, from a book, but also just understanding and refreshing yourself every so often with the basics of the poses that you're teaching. Know about the pose really well before you try to offer adjustments in it. And then the 4th element is practice, practice, practice. Practice and all is coming, or 99% practice, 1% theory. So get on your mat, and that was Patabi Joyce who said that, of course. That's a popular saying, 99% practice, 1% theory. Get on your mat and practice. So less about reading, although again, this can be your 1% resource, and more about practicing. If you want to give hands-on assists and adjustments, then find a friend and practice with them. Practice on people you're comfortable with. And practice doesn't mean just your physical yoga practice. It means practice teaching. If you want to be a great teacher, you've got to teach. If you want to be a great student, you've got to practice as a student. So whatever it is you want to be great at, you've got to practice. So practice encompasses more than simply getting on your mat. It's practice teaching too. Principle number 1 was, remember, teach what you know. Principle number 2 is ask permission to touch. So there are a couple things not recommended for how to get permission. One being is everyone okay with hands-on assists, like having people raise their hand? So raising hand or asking for a show of hands, not okay, it calls people out. Number 2 is having it a checkbox yes or no on an initial student waiver or an initial form, because some poses people want assists, some poses they don't. Some days they do, some days they don't. And then another way that is very popular but is not necessarily recommended is little flip cards or yes or no cards or chips or things that you would say, it's like a chip or a rock that you have that's green for yes and red for no. And the reason that is not recommended is, the biggest reason is that it takes students out of their practice and it assumes that they remember to flip it. So you have to come out of your yoga practice in the zone in order to say, okay, I don't want an assist here, but I do there. So it's a little bit just doesn't keep you in the yoga zone. It's distracting for the students. And sometimes people forget to flip it, and that can be an issue too. So those are ways not to ask permission. The number 1 way to ask permission to touch a student is to ask, is this okay? Is to ask. Is this okay? Can I make an adjustment on you? May I touch you here? May I assist you? Are you open to an adjustment? So any kind of question that you can ask them right before you touch them, even if it's just is this okay? So make sure that you get permission by simply asking. And the more you do it, the more you'll become comfortable with it. If you're not used to asking or going up to students and asking to touch them, yeah, it's gonna feel weird, but do it a few times and it gets more comfortable. So there are reasons we ask permission. Number 1, it's respectful. Number 2, different people have different preferences to touch. Some people love it, some people don't. And number 3 is people change. People change their minds and people change day to day with how they're feeling. So ask permission. Principle number 3 of these 7 principles to hands-on adjustments is to have a clear intention. Know what you are doing. That's the basics of it. You should have an intention or a reason behind why you're touching people. You're not just brushing their face, or it's not a massage. It's not a I'm just going to touch you to touch you. It's not a grab. It's when you're adjusting people, there is a reason behind it, and there should be a reason behind every step you take, every word that you say, and getting very clear on why you are doing what you are doing. So if you don't understand why you're doing it, then the student is likely not going to understand too. You should always be able to answer the question, why did you do that? Why did you make that adjustment on me? And it should be easy for you to answer, or you can maybe even explain to them while you're doing it. If you're pressing somewhere, you say something like, this will get you deeper or unlock your shoulders or help you to feel a little bit more. So there should always be a purpose. Principle number 4 is to move with the breath. So not just moving with students' breath, like following them, but to really tap into, the student's breath, to move, lengthening on the inhale, pressing on the exhale. And we've talked about this with cueing too. So if you're reaching, if you want to help someone get longer and you're pulling apart, that's on an inhale. If you're lifting, it's on an inhale. So watch the inhale and exhale. If all of a sudden you press someone's shoulders down when they inhale, it might feel a little bit weird. Whereas if you press down on an exhale, grounding. So follow the breath and tap into the student's breath as you make adjustments. Principle number 5, honor safe biomechanics. So understand the biomechanics of a person's body. First, use and encourage active joints. Assist proximally. So that means closest to the midline, closest to the center of the body. So if you're going to make assists or adjustments, you want to touch maybe shoulders and hips more so than the hand or the foot. That's going to actually adjust somebody into correct alignment. Now there are a few ways that you can adjust distally. Distal is farthest point, so this is a distal. This is proximal, distal. Proximal, distal, just to get those words. There are a few adjustments you can make distally, and I'll talk about the difference between those two and when they're appropriate. But if you want to honor safe biomechanics and you're really making an adjustment, proximal is better. Don't apply pressure to vulnerable joints, so don't be pressing on someone's knees, or I had my teacher, I actually had to tell him not to do this because my elbows hyperextend, and so when I was in a, say, forward fold like this, he would press my wrists down, causing my elbows to extend even more. So from then on, that was a distal adjustment, which didn't work for me. So I'm here, he was pressing on my hands, and what he actually needed to do was come up higher and press more so on my arms, which felt a lot better, rather than trying to get my, my elbows out of joint. So the proximal was better. I just had to tell him, and I know a lot of students are not really that open to saying things like that. And even me, as a yoga teacher and working with this teacher for a long time, it still took me some courage to say, hey, that doesn't feel good, could you try something else? Because there's something in student mind that says, oh, the teacher knows what they're doing. So let's not assume at all. I know the students will assume that you know what you're doing. So really having that communication between you and your student, is this okay? Does this feel okay? Do you need me to adjust anything? Is really important, okay? So very important. Other biomechanics is watch how the student's body is responding. If they flinch or if they tense or tighten up, that's a cue. If they start to squish their face, if they do something like, then that's a cue, of course. So watch how they respond. Do they actually get into it more? Are they going to the place that you want them to, or is something else happening? And then just check if there are any fundamental misalignments, and those are things you can correct too. Consider asking the student to come out of the pose and then back into it just to see how they got into it. So there's things you can do just to check on the biomechanics of the student's body itself. And you can read those again in the notes. Now the last two principles. The sixth one is to teach essential elements, pose elements, asana elements. And that means teaching how to find stability and ease, teaching alignment, energetic action. Where is your energy going? Teaching transitioning in, the pose itself and refining it, and transitioning out. So remember, that is what we're teaching, and teach just come back to the basics pretty much of each pose. And number 7, support stable foundations. Establish your own foundation as a teacher first. And when I get into talking about what helped me with making physical adjustments, you'll hear about my misalignments with my own foundation. But this is often how teachers can get hurt, is by having poor foundation when you're making assists or adjustments, or even poor posture when you're teaching. Number 1, it comes off as, I don't want to say not confident, but when your posture is bad, slouched, It's not good for your body, number one, but it's harder to be confident and open and well-spoken when you have poor posture. It also gives you space to get injured if you are doing something with making an adjustment. Now, there shouldn't be any adjustments as a beginner that you're really pressing or putting a lot of force into, so there's not tons of room for error, but at the same time, if you have an unstable foundation, your students are also going to feel that instability. So you want to be very stable in your stance, and we'll go through a couple stances and how you would stand as a yoga teacher giving an adjustment. So you want to make sure that you are stable, your foundation is good, and at minimum, you have the energy or the confidence to make that adjustment. So take a breath before you make an adjustment. If you see someone out of alignment and you want to help them out, or you have some time to give someone a press and down dog, take a deep breath and then come over to them and say, is this okay? And then do your adjustment. So that was the 7 principles of hands-on adjustments. We've got teaching what you know, asking permission to touch, having a clear intention, moving with the breath, honor safe biomechanics, teach essential asana elements, and support your stable foundations. Again, those are going to be found in here in the foundation section, but just some things to think about as you move forward in your journey to making hands-on adjustments as a new yoga teacher. If you are working with brand new students, whether it's in a group or private lessons for one-on-one training, you will want to collect information from these students. And if you are able to, if you are the one setting up these classes, you might want to start with a new student inquiry form. And that can be online or it can be done on paper. And all this is asking your students some simple questions so that you can get information to best serve them in the yoga practice. And if you are making hands-on adjustments, it's going to direct where you should go or what you shouldn't do, should and shouldn't do with someone's body if they have injuries or conditions that you need to be aware of. So of course, if someone is injured and they don't really know, the best thing you can say is talk to your doctor. And if someone does have a condition, another great thing you can do is simply say, do what you're able to do and I will help you where I can. But you're going to mostly back off if it's out of your wheelhouse, if you do not know. Remember, principle 1 was teach what you know. And if you don't know about something, don't try to teach it, don't try to assist with it, direct them to someone else that can help. Okay, so how would you create a student inquiry form and what questions would you ask? First of all, you want to get their basic information. If this is you as a sole proprietor, as the yoga business, you can collect this information to use for your own purposes. Email address, phone number for text messaging if they give permission, their name, even their mailing address, and any basic information that you want to for your own reasons. And you can also tell them it's just for marketing purposes or to keep them in the loop. If you are working for someone else, you are not allowed to keep that information. So they get that information. You might be able to see it, but it should be kept confidential for the business. So if you are hired by a studio or a gym, you should not be collecting email addresses or phone numbers or anything. But if you're doing it on your own, again, as a business, on your own, you can collect those things. As for the questions that they answer, that should be used by anyone who is teaching a class. So that is information for the teachers, for the studio owners, and really whoever is working with that student. And those questions could be on this sheet that I have a few of them, but it's really whatever you want to know. So here's a few example questions. Have you ever practiced yoga? Or have you ever practiced insert whatever class you're teaching? It might be yoga sculpt, it might be vinyasa yoga, it might be a style of yoga, or just simply have you ever practiced yoga? And if so, what style and for what period of time and how frequently? All of those are important. So someone's saying, oh yeah, I've practiced yoga when they've done one class 3 years ago versus someone who practices yoga every day for the past 3 years is going to have a very different need and body structure and need more or less attention. So all of those are relevant to collect for that question. Number 2, do you have any injuries or conditions, or is there anything else going on with your body that I should be aware of? Ankles, knees, hips, back, shoulders, wrists. And it's not on here, but you can also ask if they have any psychological or emotional things going on, because someone dealing with a breakup or going through a major life change can often show up physically. So you can ask that. Of course, they don't have to answer any of these, but it is helpful if they're willing to share. Number 3, if a student reports an injury or an issue, ask them more about it. So dive deeper. What is it about your knee? Have you had surgery? What have you done about it? What have you tried? Is it in pain now, or when do you feel pain? Is there pain? How does it feel? All of those things. Ask about the certain injury or condition. And number 4, ask if they're pregnant or if they just had a baby. If they just had a baby, that's going to be similar to what you would train for prenatal yoga, kind of just avoiding really deep poses, really deep poses, or pushing yourself too much, and knowing with people who just had a baby, there's a lot more relaxin in their bodies, so it's opening up their joints a bit more, and it makes them a little bit more unstable. So there's some things to know with pre and postnatal if anyone's pregnant or has just had a baby. Number 5, what is your work or daily life like? If someone's working on a farm, hauling hay bales and running around with the cows, I don't know, just an example, it's going to be a different type of body than someone who sits in an office cubicle all day. So if they have a very sedentary life, or if they're very active, what does their daily life look like? What do they do for work? That all contributes to what they might need as a yoga student. And then the last one is, what do you do for exercise? What do you currently do? What have you done? Any kinds of questions that relate to simply their physical body and how they're feeling inside and outside can help you as a yoga teacher to direct your path for making adjustments and for teaching in general. So one-on-one or group lessons, these are good to know. You don't need to memorize all of them, but if people do fill out a new initial inquiry, make sure to look at it. I had a teacher once come in late, and I was 17 weeks pregnant, and I wrote it on the form. I know I could have told her, but she came in late and didn't really say hi to anybody. And she didn't know that I was pregnant. She didn't look at any of the forms. I was brand new, and she learned afterwards. She looked at the form after class and said, "Oh, you're pregnant." It's like, yes, I am. So I remember, and of course I remember this, and I tell this story because I think that is a bit of an unsafe practice, not giving yourself enough time to look through, especially the new student inquiries. If you have a form that people fill out, look at it, at least glance at it to see if there is any conditions you need to dive a little bit deeper on or to give special attention to. By the way, everything was fine in that yoga class. I knew my limits. It was also an aerial yoga class. I had fun. It wasn't a big deal, but it was just a little bit odd that I would just sneak in there and no accommodations or thoughts were put into it. So don't be that teacher, okay? Be the teacher that looks at the inquiries, that takes notice of the students, what they fill out and what they share with you. Now it's up to you. I would love for you to do a little homework assignment, and that would be to write out your own inquiry form. What are the things that you would want to know as a new teacher? I will also give you a couple more examples. I have some inquiry sheets that I got from the past, but really it's up to you. If you want to write your own, create your own, please do so. So take some of mine, take some from the internet, take some from examples from others, and create your own new student inquiry form so that you can have something on hand when you have a new student join you for practice. Let's go through a few ways of how not to touch students. There's a few of them actually, and we've got a little list here. I think there are 7 of them, 7 ways to not touch students. Again, it does go a little bit more in depth in this book, but we'll go through each of those just as a little refresher. Number 1 is distally. Distal is farthest from the midline, where proximal is closest. So distally means on the hands, on the feet, the crown of the head, that kind of thing. Now I'm gonna give a little like, it's okay sometimes type of deal. This is not a blanket, you cannot touch someone's hands or feet. This is more so for safe stability adjustments. It's better to go more inward. However, there are some reasons why you might want to touch distally occasionally. And one of them, and the example I want to give you is, let's say side angle. Someone's here and they're reaching. What I've often found is someone's hands like this, or usually like this. And so if they're here, it's very easy for a 2-finger adjustment, and I'm going to talk about 2-finger adjustments a few times, to take 2 fingers and just turn their hand down. And that actually is very helpful. So if you are going to touch distally, make sure it's a very light touch, 2-finger adjustments. This is the type of adjusting that I learned in my 200-hour training. We called it 2-finger adjustments. It means you should only be able to use 2 fingers when you're touching someone to correct their alignment. So this is not assisting to get deeper. This is correcting alignment and correcting poor posture, or correcting a pose to make sure that it's safe and keeping us injury-free. You should be able to make any kind of adjustments for correcting posture with 2 fingers. So 2 fingers, 2 fingers, 2 fingers, 2 fingers, 2 fingers, right? 2. So that is one way to touch with 2 fingers without pressing or getting too far. Let's get off the tangent now and go back to do not touch distally. So one little thing, like changing hands once here and there is helpful, but do so sparingly, okay? So focus more so on the shoulder or hips, or more towards the midline of the body. At number 2, of course, do not touch forcefully. We don't want to force anyone. We don't want to drop on anyone. We don't want to force them into anything. We're not going to touch meanderingly. You're not going to brush somebody and just sort of stay there for no reason and just touch and hold your hand on someone's leg. We don't do that. There has to be purpose. There needs to be intention behind your touching. And meandering in a touch, not okay. Blindly. This is both for you and the student. So you don't want to come up from someone from behind, or from behind them and start to touch them. Of course, you want to ask permission first, but coming up blindly for the student maybe shocks them a bit. And also, same with you. If you're not really looking what you're doing and you're making an adjustment and you're like over here, and you're looking this way at other people, you want to make sure you're focusing on what's going on in front of you. So you don't want to be blind yourself to the student. You also don't want the student to be shocked when you come up to them. And the next one is destabilizing. So if you don't have proper foundation, or if your posture is bad, or if you're kind of wavy and shaky, you haven't taken a breath, do that first, get stable before you jump in and make an adjustment. You don't want to touch randomly. Meaning you're just walking around the room, randomly touching, doing little ponytail head flicks and touching people's arms, like random for no reason. We want to have intention. And the last one, you do not want to touch, or even the off chance of possibly touching someone inappropriately. Yes, there are accidentals here, but like keep that as rare as possible. We don't want to slip. We don't want anything to happen in a way that makes us the inappropriate teacher. So no touching inappropriately. There are some bigger assists and adjustments out there that are a little more invasive and interesting, but you have to be very comfortable in a professional relationship from teacher to student in order to get into those. As a new teacher, as a beginner making hands-on adjusts, I would not even go there with those deeper assists until you yourself are very comfortable as a student with those adjustments, and you felt it for yourself a bunch of times, and then you're working with someone that you're very comfortable with, and it is there's really good boundaries. So set really, really great boundaries when you're doing this, and as a beginner, there shouldn't be any of these things. Distal, forceful, meandering, blind, destabilizing, random, or inappropriate touches. There you go. Stay away from those. And now let's talk about how you should touch people in the next lesson. We went through a few ways of how not to touch people, and now let's talk about how to actually touch. What do we do with our hands? And hands are going to be our primary touching mechanism. We usually don't touch people with our elbows or our feet or other parts of our body, although those could come into play later on when you're making different kinds of assists. But as a beginner, and we're just doing correcting alignment adjustments, we want to keep it simple, so we're using our hands. Here are a few ways that you can touch people. Number one would be this thing called hip handles, where you place your hands on someone's hips to help them forward or back or move them from this central region of our body. Our movements often, well, most of them do, stem from the pelvic region, the core, this area. So finding stability here. Let's say you're in a lunge, you can place your hands on someone's hips to bring them forward and back. Now we're not putting a lot of force or pressure or grabbing, we're not grabbing waists or anything, it's the hip bones, like just below the hips, pressing in, moving forward and back. And you can do so just with your palms, just with the palms, so there is no need for the fingers to even grab anything. You could also do it with just a finger or two, so you can put your fingers here and move them forward and back. This is a little more stable and grounding for someone to help with more movement if you're really holding onto them. And the two fingers is really just helping them by guiding them very gently. So those are hip handles. Next one is, let's actually turn the page here and get into them. Next one is open palms. This is the one I probably use the most for, let's say, a downward facing dog. Open palms is just as it sounds, open palms. So we're not massaging. This is not a massage. It's really just helping people get a little deeper or correcting their alignment. That's what we're going for. Let's say this person is very short and they're in a downward facing dog. If I'm standing up, I'm going to be standing up. Now I'm kneeling, but I do an adjust where I press in someone's lower back. We go upward towards their tailbone. We press equally into both hands, and it's my palms that are bearing the weight. There's no fingers grabbing or anything. Open palms. Open palms, if you, just right here, spread your fingers, open palms here. Open palms, so there's no grabbing. Usually that's a press in like a down dog or on a lower back. If you're doing, let's say, a seated forward fold, you can press into someone's lower back just gently to help them get a little bit deeper or feel a little bit more. You can also do the open palm where you press with one hand on someone's back and tell them, press into my hand. Or even in a triangle pose, you can give an open palm on someone's hand and tell their hand to press into your hand. But if we're doing more proximal, you want to place your hands on hips, low back, upper back, shoulders, these areas of the body that are still pretty safe and best for a stable foundation. So it's open palms. Next one is clasping rotation. Downward facing dog is a great example of this in a couple ways. Number one, the arms. So you're clasping, so you're grabbing the arms here. Not a clasp, I guess. I don't want to say grab. You don't want to grab anybody, but a clasp, and you're rotating outward. So up on the biceps, rotate outward. Or you might be up by the shoulders. Use your thumb to help them rotate outward. You can do the same thing in the hip region in down dog, where you hold onto the hips like a hip handle, pull upwards and rotate. So it's this little rotation here. Now if you're at someone's legs, we'll get to that one in a moment, but the arms, the clasping rotation, in the hips, clasping rotation. I like downward facing dog for practicing a lot of these adjustments because it's a pretty stable pose. It's one that feels good when you make adjustments, and it's easy to back off when needed. So down dog could be a great place to start your giving physical adjustments practice as a teacher. Next one is one that I don't really use a lot. It's a finger spread. So it goes from small to wide. Finger spread. That might be great on the back. Finger spread. So just getting a little more energy into that area, opening up that area. I don't use that a lot, but it just allows you to feel boom, this little point, this specific point, and then open up in that area. Another one is with the fingers, it's a finger draw. Not a meandering finger draw, but actually fingers down. So you got fingers, it's not a scratch, you're not using your nails, using the pads of your fingers to draw downward or draw upward. And you could potentially do this just with one hand going up or two. This is a good one for, let's say like boat pose. This is a good one. So you have a couple fingers here. Someone's in boat pose. You come up to their back and just a gentle lift or a little finger draw up their spine makes their heart lift, and they love it, and they both love it and hate it. So it makes them lift a little bit more and feel more. Same with downward facing dog. If you see someone who could lift a little bit more, draw up with the fingers, up the center of their back, and it gives them a little lift. Do that with an inhale. And same with a finger draw, maybe down the arms. In that downward face, or in the warrior two, finger draw you can do with your hands as well. So keep it basic with some poses like down dog, warrior two, seated forward fold. And then the next one is an opposite rotation. It allows you to, it's mostly like on the upper back or shoulders, and it allows you to give a little bit more rotation. So it's not a clasp and rotate. Instead, it's open palms and rotate. So you're doing a little fan outward. So that's great for the shoulders if they feel a little bit tense to open up. So that's the open rotation. Light finger flicks. I actually like this one in a few different ways. So this might be on a foot or hands typically. So this is how you could get more distal, more away from the midline of the body, but you're not really touching a whole lot. It's very light. So you might say, like you just tap their foot and say, press down into the arch of the foot. Or you might, one of my favorites, and maybe you can see this, in downward facing dog, hopefully, someone's fingers are spread wide, you come up to them and just try to bring their fingers up. Because they shouldn't come up. If they're pressing into their fingers, you might, tell them, press harder into your fingers so I can't bring your fingers up. So if you're able to flick someone's fingers, they need to press harder. So it's just a little flick, little finger flick, either on the foot, like, hey, press here, or push down, or it's just a little tap, just a tap. It's like one of those 2-finger adjustments. It helps activation in the rooting areas of the body, so feet and hands typically. And then there are 2 more. Crossed wrists. This one you have to be comfortable with your person that you're giving to, and they have to be okay with it. This is like a downward facing dog or forward fold. You would cross your wrists and pull. Does that make sense? So let's say I'm here, cross and pull. Now pretend I'm doing this from behind myself. So my teacher's coming behind, grab and pull. And you're gonna come here, pull. That's great in a downward facing dog or forward fold. And the last one is light hands. And as long as it's done intentional, it's not random, light hands really just means anything just done lightly. 2-finger adjustments, pressing gently on a shoulder, doing something with a very light touch that doesn't have a lot of stability or grounding effects to it. It's just something that simply you want them to feel a little more, so you give a light touch to help them out. Like right here, hey, could you just open your knee a little bit more? Press into the pinky toe. And it's a little light touch. Or you might give a little light touch to spread the rib cage, or just spread here a little bit more, or press towards my hand, and it's very light, very light. I like the light touches best of anything. Light touching and 2-finger adjustments are my favorite because they still give the correction and adjustment you're looking for and the attention to students who do like the physical adjustments without feeling like you're getting too invasive or that your class is dependent on the physical adjustments. One thing I don't want for my students is for them to always assume that I'm going to touch them throughout the entire class. And that's what they come for. I don't want people in my practice who come because of the need for physical touch. That is something that they need to work on elsewhere. They can buy a massage or work with their therapist. But as yoga teachers, we are not massage therapists. We are not regular therapists. So we want to keep it as much as we can to teaching the practice of yoga, poses, breath work, and all of the things that come with our style of yoga practice. So I hope those helped. Again, this book, Yoga Adjustments, is going to be helpful. So those are different ways to touch someone in a practice. I hope that was helpful, and thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next lesson. We'll talk about your physical stance as a yoga teacher, your foundation. So how do you stand as a yoga teacher to give a physical adjustment that feels stable for yourself and creates a good foundation for both you and your student? There are a few ways that you can stand. Your stance and your posture really can affect yourself and your student in this practice, and it also keeps you safe from injury. Actually, it keeps both of you safe from injury. When you are stable, it's more likely your student is stable. If you are unstable, there's no way your student can get stable with that adjustment. Your goal is to make them as stable and safe as possible in your class, and that starts with you. So let's go through those positions of movements and different stances. Right here, I've got my notes. I've got a few of them, and one is mountain pose. If your students are standing and you are walking around and you want to give an adjustment, you will be standing in a stable mountain pose. It can be feet maybe a little wider. If you're unaware, a wider stance is more stable than a narrow stance. So this might be a mountain pose with feet perhaps hip distance or so. So if you're giving an adjustment in someone else in mountain pose, you might be standing in mountain pose. Ask them, is this okay? And you come over and give an adjustment, a rotation, a lift, something with your hands. So mountain stance is the first one. Second is a horse stance. So we take the feet wide and we lower down. Horse stance. And avoid rounding in the back. So we're not going down this way or reaching or pressing this way. We want to keep the shoulders back, abs engaged. This is why your personal practice is very important, so that you can keep the strength to be able to hold here and be stable when you're assisting somebody. So horse stance, right? Horse stance. If you need to rotate somebody, if you're standing next to them and you hold their hips, or if you are even down lower and you're holding, let's see, if I'm in down dog, I either have one foot stepping back or I'm in horse stance, mostly one foot stepping back when I do press into somebody's lower back, if I'm giving more of a weighted assist. Next one is a hip stance. That's when you bump up to someone's hip. This is a great one for half moon, and I do this occasionally. I wouldn't say frequently, but occasionally, where I line up the edge of my foot with the edge of their foot, and my hip touches their hip. And they're usually they're open to the opposite direction I am, and I roll open their hip. So hip to hip stance. Hip to hip. Same thing can be done in a few other poses, but I like warrior, like half moon or warrior 3, or a balancing pose where one of the legs is stable for the person that is in the pose, and then you as a teacher line up next to them hip to hip. Next one is a knees down stance. So if you're correcting somebody who's in a lunge, you take a knee down and you've got 90 degree, 90 degree, avoiding rounding or avoiding instability yourself. So you want to have proper yoga posture too, even though you're not in the pose that your students are in, but you have proper posture while you're assisting. So it might be knees down as you press, as you adjust, as you rotate. Next one is a low chair stance. So low chair stance here. So feet, again, a little bit wider, and you're coming down. You might be rotating someone or pressing, but you want to be stable with the person in a good position for you to be able to make that adjustment. Next one, it could be even right here, a low squat. This is often how I will adjust people in Savasana. So with their head facing me, I come down and I adjust. I'm going to get to Savasana adjustments in a different video so that you can focus just on that. So Savasana adjustment, I'm often down here, although there are some other ways that you could be on the ground, such as simple seated. So you could sit here, you could sit here, any kind of seated way that gets your body around someone else's. Now there's also other seated poses, again, wide leg stance, or even a low squat. You can be up on the off the heels. This is more of what's called a noose stance. So here, right, and you're adjusting someone. But the more stable you are, the better it is. So those are your stances, and just what to think about for posture. Think about your posture. Think about your breath. So there's no hunching or leaning down. We're not doing this as we press into someone. How I learned good posture was by doing Thai yoga massage. Not technically massage, but kind of. Thai yoga body work. And when we learned that, we had to be very aware of our stance as the giver of the body work. Because if you're giving body work hunched over for an hour or 75 minutes or 90 minutes, you're going to feel it, and you can't really do a whole lot of lessons or sessions in one day without feeling in your body. So if you're feeling your body feeling like, it doesn't feel so great, it feels like I need a stretch, then check your posture, check your stance when you're walking around, when you're teaching. When you're demoing specifically, you want to be on 140% because your students are going to follow you half that, if anything. So your demos, your posture will also make your students' posture better because they'll see you and they feel it. You can feel it when someone has an uplifted posture and you are stable and grounded. So take a breath, get stable, and make your adjustment. This is going to be my Savasana adjustment demonstration. And we're going to pretend this person here is a person, a bolster and a block. So this is the person's head and this is the person's shoulders, okay? And they're laying down as they would. So my typical adjustment is based on what I felt as a student. So it's important for you to know what this feels like and to feel it in your body before you do it. So hopefully you have a teacher, or you can get together with someone, or even ask someone to do it to you, even if they're not a yoga teacher, so that you can just sort of feel it and notice the pressure and what feels good and what doesn't. What I do not want to see, and what I have seen from some of my trainees in the past, we're not going to do this. We're not giving like massages. We're not giving like head massage. We're not rubbing people's faces. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is applying simple pressure and making very simple adjustments that feel good to someone's upper body and makes them feel more relaxed. So what are some ways we can do that? Number one, you want to get in a good stance. So I'll come up to someone and they've given me permission, it's okay, and I usually sit in a squat. That's how I'm comfortable. For someone else, you might have to get down here or here to do this. I sit in a squat. I have been known to do this here. That's not so good for your body if you're going to be bending over. So a chair or a low squat will be very good for Savasana. Take a breath and then notice their breath. When they inhale, you can see their shoulders rise or the belly rise, and exhale, lower. So the first thing I do is notice the person's breath. I might give a little rub of my hands so they know that I'm there, so they're aware and they're not, oh my goodness, what's going on? So they've already given me permission or they're okay with it, but at the same time, I don't want to shock them if this is like, it's been a while and they might be in a trance of some kind. So I might give a little rub of my hands. If I have essential oils, I rub it in my hands. And the first thing I do is I go to their shoulders, an open hand. I push down and forward. And I might use a little pressure, knees to elbows, as they exhale, down and forward. Down and forward. Not a lot of pressure, just enough to make it feel relaxed. Have someone do that to you to notice what it feels like and what would feel good if it's more down or more forward, and down and forward. And if you're hesitant about it, lighter is better. So just a nice little down and forward and out. Down, forward, out. Follow the breath. And I might do that 3 times or maybe just once. So a few times of and then the next thing I do is I grab the back of their neck, maybe if they're not super sweaty. So it could just end with the shoulders. Cool, we're done. If you want to add more, and what I usually do is take the back of the neck and pull. So I'll go underneath, I'll cradle their head, and then pull. Oh, head popped off. I'll pull or just drag my hands along the back of their neck to this occipital bone, and I might hold my fingers in that occipital area, cradling their head for a moment, and then pulling and letting them down. I don't want to pull too much or tilt their head so their chin is to their chest at all. It's just a nice like lengthen of the neck and place it down. Next thing I do is take my thumbs, little thumbs, and place it on just above the eyebrows, and I do a little eyebrow sweep. So eyebrow sweep, eyebrows here, so my fingers go on the sides of the head, thumbs just at the top of the eyebrow, and I sweep outward to the temples. Now I don't like massage the temples at all. No. It's just sweep outward. The most I would do like one little circle, and I might do that 1, 2, or 3 times. And the very end, last one, I do a little sweep. And then the final finishing pizzazz is just a tiny little tap right between the eyebrows. So I do a eyebrow sweep, 1, 2, or 3 of them, and then I do a tiny tap, not a tap, but like very light. It just has to be super light, like you're tickling the hairs on someone's forehead. Very light tap. That's what I typically do. So it's 3 shoulders. If I'm getting in someone's business in Savasana, the biggest and most I'll do is 3 shoulder presses with the breath, neck, temples of the forehead, eyebrow sweep 3 times, and then a little tiny tap. Now there's other things you can do too, depending on the comfort level with your students. You can simply take your fingers on the hairline, you can hold there, you can, now again, we're not getting too much in massage, but I have had a teacher give me like a little hair scratch, like head scalp thing, just a little scratchy scratch. Oh, it felt so good. So know your students, that's the primary thing, know your students. Now the last thing that I'm gonna mention, and a different way that you can adjust students, not on their heads, but instead on their legs, is something that I've done a few times, that if people are super sweaty, or if I'm just not interested in doing shoulder type things, or this is a great way to do an assist when it's not near their face, so we're still, maybe it's pandemic land and we don't want to give face or shoulder adjustments, you do it to their legs. So I don't have legs here, but let's pretend I've got legs here. Again, I get down, I grab underneath their leg, right on their ankles, and I lift up. And so their legs are kind of high. I'm in this chair stance, and I just give them a little sway, and then pull, and it lengthens their back, and then sits down. So if I'm the student, their feet relax, give them a little sway, not big, just little, and then sit them back down, maybe a little wider, and let their feet turn out. And it helps to lengthen the low back, and it just gives you a little extra like, oh yeah, that's a different kind of adjustment that feels good. So those are your Shavasana adjustments. So that's what I do with Shavasana. You can choose shoulders, you can do an eyebrow sweep, you can do a neck pull, or anything else that you've experienced that might feel good. So go out and experience it for yourself, get a partner together and practice this, and see what feels good. Practice asking permission, And for very beginners, I guess I do have one more thing to say. For very, very beginners, in a beginner yoga class, show this to them. This is one thing I always made sure to show people. I would say, okay, everybody, watch what I'm going to do. So if I am someone, as a teacher, who likes to give Savasana adjustments, and they can expect these in other classes, I will say, okay, beginner class, does anyone want to be my demo? And someone usually like, sure, I'll be your demo. And I go, okay, this is what I do at the end of class when we're in Savasana. What I'm going to do is give you a shoulder press here and an eyebrow sweep. You can always opt out. I just want you to see what that is so you don't all of a sudden go, what's going on? And so it's just really helpful so for someone to see it so they also just don't get up and be like, what's she doing? What is she doing to the person next to me? I've seen it happen. Give them plenty of preparation time and show them, as well as telling them what to expect. There you have it.